Hello, 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 and welcome to the game, a Pax8 show where our experts discuss the latest developments and innovations and threats and developments in the cybersecurity realm. I'm Rob Barnes, your on-air producer, and I'm joined by our hosts, Matt and Dom, with a special guest today, Dan Lay, to cover what it means to have solid identity and trust within the MSP space. Be sure to like and subscribe, and make sure you comment too to help grow the channel. And if you want to see more of this and you want to talk about it, it's all there for you. But without further ado, I'm going to take you over to our hosts of the day, Matt and Dom, and we're going to kick it off with some news.
Here, I'm going on vacation next week.
There you are.
So am I.
All
I
right.
survived SKO, and I'm
Yeah.
here to talk about the news.
And we're not going to the same locations. There's no risk of both of us dying in the same tragic accident, right? As I understand it.
That is correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So the show will go on as a result.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Rob, we're going to get started on the news on this one because I think this is one that, Dom, I'd love to just bend your ear on. I haven't had much time with you lately, so I'd love your opinion. Rob, would you bring up the Insurance Journal article for me? All right. Big old fat in the middle. Couldn't have made the graphics any better. Claim denied. But worse so, it's actually a little different. And so if we go on to read the article, travelers once out is the way it's being phrased, but it's done through a rescission lawsuit. They're essentially suing to say, I want to rescind this lawsuit or this insurance coverage as if it had never existed, as if it had been obtained through fraud, as if it had not. And it's a very interesting piece of that. And so, Dom, what I want to kind of ask your opinion on, and what I want to know is the implications, kind of, if you will, of what does it mean when an insurance company wants to rescind a policy versus what we would have termed before as subrogating. And we'll get into that. But this is the question for you, Dom. What do you think on that?
I think my first gut reaction was it's about time, right? Because I think if you let's take, we always like to use other forms of insurance. So let's say life insurance. Can I ask you, are you a smoker? Do you do illicit things, whatever? And you answer no, but it turns out you do it. You've now lied on a contract, right? You've signed a contract that says you don't do this or you do that, and you've lied on that. So you've materially not met your obligations under the contract. So it'll be interesting to see how this case pans out. But I think this is just an escalation of subrogation isn't really working out how they wanted. People still aren't doing the things they say they're doing and they need to do. Let's see if we can just completely back out of a business arrangement as a result of failure to comply.
Yeah, and take that a step further, right? When you talk about life insurance and smoking, it's a fairly binary thing, right? It's pretty much, did you smoke and nicotine is present in said flesh, or did you not smoke and nicotine said not present in said flesh? And so when you start getting into that, it's much more binary. But when you start thinking about cybersecurity and you ask this simple question, is MFA on? And that's the premise in the heart of this case. Where?
Right.
How
exactly.
deep? And so I think that the challenge is you get into the issue here at hand is that you don't have those same direct ability to just rescind the policy, say it was obtained fraudulently, refuse to pay out, and wait for them to sue you. You're now in a situation
that's what they're testing, right? I think this is legal saying, hey, we've got some spare budget for Q4. We're going to throw it at this and see if we can court our way out of this problem. And this will set precedent. If this goes how the insurance company wants it to go, it sets a massive precedent because they've gone to this point of put MFA everywhere and on the workstations and on the switches and on the doors and on the this they don't know what they're doing, right? And as much as we're trying to help them and working with people that are trying to help them, they still don't know. So I'm really going to be watching this one because if this goes how they want it to go, it's a game changer for the entire cyber insurance space.
If I was defending this, I think I would argue very heavily and hope that my client had written an addendum sheet that explained the limitations of their architecture. We heard this from Wes Spencer, and I also participated again in a fifth wall conversation. Not that I was talking to a fifth wall as I normally have to when I'm talking about cyber, but a name of a company called Fifth Wall, right? So I was talking to Fifth Wall, and I was having the conversation around this kind of hardening market and the risks that we're seeing in this and the challenges around this. And so it's very interesting because you're right. They're trying to set precedent. They're trying to
Mm-hmm.
make it to where this is now something referenceable, right? Most people don't understand
Right.
the Anglican legal system that we live in the United States is based on precedent law. And it has this understanding that a former court's decision, unless proven to have been phallic, I don't think that's the right use of that term,
That's
but
not the right term.
having been to be
That's okay.
a fallacy. I think it's still right, but it comes off connotatively completely wrong.
It does.
But
yes.
having been decided that they have made a fallacy in their judgment or they failed some court procedure, then we would overturn that and it would no longer be subject to being part of precedent. However, if we win a case somewhere, and maybe even a state that has very forgiving laws for the insurance companies or things like that, then you're heading down a setting precedence law. And as I started beginning, if I was a defense in this case, I would probably be trying to argue that the insurance company was asking a question that could not be answered yes or no, and that their fundamental lack of understanding of MFA and where it's been applied and what's available even in the market. There's some vendors you can't get MFA. You just dealt with this for our SOC 2, right? With a company, we won't name it, but they had to solve that challenge. And I think the problem is that if I was attacking this as a defense attorney, I would very much make sure that the insurance company in their, what Wes termed as organized gambling, which I loved, that the insurance company in the organized gambling relationship didn't understand their gamble and are now upset about it.
Right.
And that's another side of this coin, right?
Well, ambiguity in contracts is a real thing. Like we're seeing cases come up of, is checking a box really agreeing to a 14-page terms and conditions document?
EULAs, for example, right? Same concept.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So ambiguity into you have MFA is tough, and it's a lot of what's wrong with the cyber industry. Yeah, I have MFA. You know, that dude over there needs a text message, and we're good.
Yeah, we're good.
And so at the same time, too, this case could go sort of down a middle road where I don't think this customer gets their claim paid. I don't see how that.
No, I think
it's not happening.
Yeah.
But maybe there's some middle road. Maybe this pushes the insurance industry to get precise and ask real questions, not this one-page document that we see our partners signing all the time.
Yeah.
Maybe it's an interview. Maybe they align to a framework, which is what I would really enjoy them doing. That gets in. Do you have MFA for everyone, or different concepts around systems and practices and identities?
And let's be pragmatic and prescriptive here. So if you're an MSP listening, one of the things that I took away from my last 2 or 3 calls around cyber insurance with people that are much smarter than me and more licensed was that writing those extra pieces in is authoring history. What I mean by that is, and someone said it very well, you want to make an underwriter curl their brow. You want to make an underwriter go, huh? Because if you take that granular question of saying, or non-granular question of binary of, is it MFA'd? And take on the back and attach an addendum that says, we have MFA everywhere we're allowed to. Here are some of the gaps on our POAM. Here's the things that we can't do it on. Those don't become bludgeoning instruments at the end. Because if they issue a policy knowing those things, you've set the stage for what the insurability is. And so the one takeaway that I'll stand up and say on this was, if you're going to do this, write the addendum, be transparent, don't be stupid. And if you have stupid things, don't write them down. But essentially try to be transparent, right? Like if you're doing something stupid, you know it, maybe take the time to fix that. Right.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
All right, Dom, what else do we have in the news drawer, my friend? Oh, wait, Dom, hold on. We have a supervisor on the court. You have a supervisor behind. All right, we're clear. Let's get back to it. We're good.
We're good.
Okay.
We're clear. So this one has a segue in it, right? So let's read the title real quick. It says Microsoft warns of large-scale AiTM phishing attacks.
What is AiTM, Dom? I've not heard that term.
We had to research that one, didn't we? Yeah, it was adversary in the middle. So the traditional name of this attack is man in the middle. You put some sort of proxy, rogue AP, what have you, in the middle of some sort of network transaction. We're changing that to say adversary in the middle, which definitely has inclusivity points to it. Used to be man in the middle. What did it used to be? It
was man in the middle.
Yeah,
100%. And it's way more inclusive, right? Because now it's saying, hey, they get that it's threat actor, bad guy, criminal in the middle, right?
Right. Bad human, right? And now we can dislike them all equally, right, with no prejudice, which is sort of my takeaway from that.
Which is fantastic.
But if we sort of dig into the meat of what Microsoft is saying here, it's honestly not a surprise, right? So against over 10,000 organizations, everyone knows that Microsoft and cloud in general, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, what you name it, is absolutely a vector of attack. And I think the most ambitious threat actors would take on a direct attack against Microsoft. Yeah. It's actually not common. I've actually had these discussions. It's not common because people understand that it's a hard target. But if we look at this, they're attacking individual organizations through AiTM attacks against their identity layer, right? Is all that's really happening. And they're doing it at scale, which is also not hard to do nowadays.
I'll touch into this. So let's just give the raw opinion and maybe helpful for anybody watching as to how this functions. Okay. So think of it as a robot in the middle. Think of it as a proxy is the term, but a robot in the center. And that robot, you've been tricked into going there instead of the normal front end of Microsoft to sign in. So instead of going to Microsoft.com, let's say you're going to one that Matt Lee owns, which is Microsoft-online-offline.com. Let's just say, hypothetically.
Perhaps.
And you go to that site, perhaps. Don't go there right now. It's down. But if you go to that site and you type in your credentials, you are presented with a clear security lock. It's got the green lock in the top. You are presented with a sign-in box to Microsoft. And what's happening is my robot, allegedly, is taking that information and sending it over to Microsoft and sending you back and forth the responses. And if you noticed on that thing that they had up behind Dom, you saw the direction of those arrows. You can read that article. We'll get it linked. But the point is that the attacker in the middle, or the adversary in the middle that has that robot, me in this theory, is able to do a few things. I can do one. I can steal the input you've typed in to me in my form with your password and your username. The second thing that I can do is, as you send that password and username and satisfy the MFA, because this attack bypasses MFA, and I promise I'll work towards the final culmination of this. But that MFA, Dan, this is unsuspecting victim. I'm just picking on him because he can't talk right now. But Dan, the unsuspecting victim, clicks on that link, does his MFA, and signs in and is taken to Microsoft. The robot continues to proxy, so you don't know anything's wrong. And it continues to show you your Word documents and does all that. As long as I've got enough internet performance, which I can pay for because I'm stealing from you, then I can use that proxy to do a lot of very bad things as an in-the-middle position. Now, the nature of the why this works and why it gets so insidious is that not only can I steal what's happening right now with you, but because of most people's settings, and because of the way OAuth works, and because of the way the portability of what's called tokens, or as people go, nom nom cookies, right? But the understanding is those are portable, and so I can steal them. And I can take that cookie and I can load it in a web browser with a very easy tool and become you again in that session, right? And I think the point is that Microsoft's talking about this, and I want to shock people here. Dom, when do you think I first demonstrated this on video?
I know when. I don't want to cheat.
I know you're cheating.
It was not recently. It was
like almost
back.
2 years ago.
I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure Dom was taken by the cookies reference because I'm hungry.
I know,
and I was just locked on the cookies. You know what I mean? So, in Dom's defense, you were talking about pastries, and
I did go to pastries. I did mess us up here. But the point is, Dom, this is such an easy attack. And it's not very defendable in a lot of cases. Now, I'll give some super kudos out on this. I did this attack, and you'll see on my Cyber Matt Lee channel, I'll actually link the videos down below in this video later. But those videos, LinkedIn has amazing defenses to this. I did this to myself on LinkedIn, and I gained successful position. And as soon as I did, it dropped. And I got an email. I got a locked out requirement. I had to prove my identity. So there are detection mechanisms to see that proxying. But, like we like to do, we kind of always want to be pragmatic about this. And so, Dom, what are a couple of things we do in Throwdown? I'll put you on the spot here, buddy, that harden session tokens. So what are those main components?
Yeah, at the end of the day, what we're talking about is stealing a session, right? That's sort of the term. It can be tokenized. Legacy systems, not even legacy. A lot of systems use just a cookie, and it's not really a token. There's a number of things you can do. Like if you think broadly and architecturally, there's things like device printing, but let's get into these enterprise credentials in the Microsoft space. That's what we're talking about today. Manage your devices, first of all. Like that's the prerequisite to what we're going into. Manage your devices, please. Like just do it.
Harden them, maybe
included.
A little.
Well, maybe do that, but at least manage them, enroll them, set policy. Now you can say, this device must be Azure joined and Intune compliant before it can access, right? And the way that works is some magic happens. If you're in Edge, it's automatic. If you're in Chrome, it's an extension. It taps into the kernel of that device, the operating system, and says, hey, who are you? What are you? Right? So the proxy cannot do that, right? The proxy cannot use that same technology to go into your device and pull a device parent. It's just not a possibility because that device is communicating directly with Intune in this case to say, hey, I'm here and I'm doing this and these are my settings and yada, yada, yada. It's all attested to. So that device device restriction is my favorite way to do it. The other way is to say, hey, sessions are not persistent, right? This token
Amen.
works one time, grants you access for Y amount of time, and that's it, you're done, right? So now I have the token, but it's no longer valid because it's already been consumed, right? So you could do it at the identity layer. My true wish is for you to do it at the device layer. Get devices in Intune, manage them, and set policy. That is the number one way to do it, because you can do it across all your platforms. Those two things in combination almost eliminate this attack wholeheartedly. I'm sure someone has found some way. We've seen identity spoofing come out against Windows devices under certain conditions. So there's always a way.
I may have demonstrated it not too long ago in a throwdown. Yeah.
Well, I just saw an attack online that was stealing data through SATA cables, through the RF emitted from the SATA cables, stealing data. So there's always a way, right? But this makes it really hard. It makes you a hard target. It makes you less attractive.
And really quick before we continue on, I just want to say that all of these links will be in the description below that they're talking about, and there's also in the chat right now. So check that out and do that. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you, Rob. No, you're great. Thank you. In fact, that brings me to a point that we're starting to transition. So I brought up this type of attack. And Rob, can I ask you to bring up one more article? And I want to talk about how long this is out there. So the type of attack I'm using relies on what's called Evil Jinx or Evil Genix, depending on who you are. And Evil Genix 2, the second iteration thereof, is a very simple AiTM proxy in the middle that's able to be spun up very simply. And what I wanted to call your attention to is if you go to this site, this was done by the gentleman that created this initially. It shows the earliest commit. It's like 4 years ago, almost 5 years ago. This kit has been available in this iteration for almost 5 years.
And it's a fork of Nginx, if you know what that is. Like, chances are, if you go to a website, there's a really good chance it's an Nginx proxy before you get to the actual web layer. So it's just a fork.
For anyone else, WAF, right, a web application firewall, or some external piece that's meant to proxy inbound traffic so that you can protect yourself. And so what he's saying, and this is kind of the insidious nature about all of this, is it's usually living off of components that are designed to do good. It's usually living off the capabilities that are meant and accepted because they're convenient in our world, not necessarily because they're secure. And I don't like to poke that too much, but I also like to talk about positives on this show. And one of the positives is sometimes I run into people that do cool stuff. And when people do cool stuff, I want to talk to them about it. And when it's cool stuff that ties into other stuff I'm talking about, I really want to talk to them about it. So I've brought on a special guest. Rob, would you please bring up our special guest, Dan Lay, and Dom's chair. There's Dan and Dom. There. All right, great. So Dan, you're an MSP, and I want to just tell the story in the sense that one of the methods you could protect yourself when you're starting to talk about IDP chain weaknesses, and that's what I'm terming this, where the OAuth token can be manipulated by a proxy in the middle, and open authenticate. I don't know what auth stands for. I'll have to get that back because of the acronyms. But the point being,
open authentication. You got it.
Oh, you don't know the acronym?
I don't know. Is it open authentication by OIDC, OpenID Connect? Anyways, but yeah.
Dude, you'll have a better guess than I ever will. I'll start putting in random words. So,
fair.
You know, it's nice. It's nice that it's there.
I get stumped. It happens, man. It happens. But Dan used a multiple IDP strategy, which is an identity provider, right? And what that does is it allows you to, at each decision tree, make some decisions on the connection, right? Initial IDP, maybe a secondary IDP, and now saying, if you don't get through this layer, you can't get to this layer. And if you can't get to this layer, you can't get through to this layer. And so it was just brilliant to me and maybe a little overkill, but Dan, I'd love to talk to you about it. First, let's start off by introducing yourself and tell us what you do.
Thanks for having me, guys, on the show. I'm Dan, founder of Red Cup IT. We're a cybersecurity as a service, MSP, MSSP provider. We started 12 years ago. In the last 3 years, we've really focused a lot on security and compliance and figuring out, how do we assume breach? How do we make sure that we never get breached? And that way we can truly protect our customers and our partners and vendors as well. So, that's our core focus right now. Is it all starts with asset and identity, and that's what I've been focusing on for the past 3 years.
So I'm not going to lie, my tire screech sound played in my head as you said the word breach. Breach breaks my heart. But the concept I used. Yeah, don't say the B word, man. I get triggered. But the concept is assume compromise, right? Assume that you're, and I used to have this term called live compromised. And I would tell my people, we're trying to understand that at any given time, you're probably compromised. How do we live with that? And to your point in terminology, assume breach, right? Have this mentality that someone's here. Let's try to find it fast. Let's try to react. But that's really cool. So what part of the country are you based out of?
I'm based in Los Angeles, California right now.
Man, Dom, we need to go visit on site, I think, sir.
That's important. Yeah.
Never rains, great weather, so can't complain.
So what prompted you to go down this path, right? That's kind of avant-garde. And maybe go ahead and start by describing what you've put in place. And let's help the audience understand what I mean when I say multiple chained identity providers.
Sure. So we've always been agnostic, where we support Google Workspace and Microsoft at the same time. So for us as an MSP, we wanted to have the best identity for all platforms. And once we started down the path of conditional access and configuring that for Azure, we realized, okay, how do we do this for Google too? And then since we support multiple identities and we're a partner for both, we started running into challenges where we're kind of doing multiple duplicate work in multiple places. And then, so that's why we went to we figured out, okay, we need to have a third-party identity.
Yeah.
Which we
in essence you said, let's move this back a layer. Let's move the control plane back from Microsoft as a producing entity or as an identity provider, but instead as a consuming entity or as a consumption entity or a service provider.
Service provider.
Space. Yeah. Thank you.
Exactly.
Got me. And then, so that also now allowed you to have uniform policies across all of those those consuming constituency, right?
Exactly. So we also do AWS DevOps as well. So now that we're multi-cloud MSP, we do have to elevate and bring it back a level, so that way we can manage our directories and our groups in one place, and then we can then sync it down to the different clouds. We also support Apple devices too, and that also has its own tool called Apple Business Manager. And
you went down the ABM path.
Yeah,
man, that is a strong jaw, my friend. That's a strong jaw. Yeah. That's awesome.
We also support
we'll do Apple maybe here in a minute.
Yeah, we also do Apple DEP for most of our customers, and zero touch config and all the challenges that come with that. So by trying to do the best of all the clouds and all the different vendors, it led us down the path of realizing, okay, we're creating so many groups in Apple, groups in Microsoft, groups in AWS, and then attaching roles and permissions, all these different groups. And then now we're managing 4 different clouds and environments, and they're all different. So how do we do that at scale? So we had to pick Okta as our vendor for that. And then once we realized, okay, now I've done that, all of my keys are in one kingdom, which is Okta, which then gets me into these 4 different other clouds. So then assuming compromise, or we figured out that how do we also not trust Okta? So okay, let's put Beyond Identity in front of that. So we'll put Beyond Identity in front of our Okta, which is then in front of our Google, Apple, Microsoft, AWS. So by taking that approach,
you probably create most of the group bulk structure still in Okta, and you're just making the barrier to entry be Beyond Identity predominantly before that, so that you can have almost lower trust on these Okta groups, but not having to try to abstract a second layer with all those groups, right? You're keeping that inside that SCIM provisioning. Yeah.
Correct. It is. Yes, we are using SCIM inside Okta. So we're pushing those groups into Beyond. So you get to Beyond, and then from Beyond you get into Okta, and then from Okta you get into AWS. So
yeah, but Okta is the single source of truth, but its replication extends back to Beyond for awareness. Like I hadn't actually thought about that component, but for anybody that's following me technically, it means you have this protected single source of truth that's feeding policy enforcement points. You are, by very definition, at least according to 800-207, defining zero trust, right? Because you are creating policy enforcement points that are behind a blind zone that are making awareness and recognition of those capabilities all the way out to the very edge. And that's pretty cool, man.
And can I jump in here really quick? Can I just say, like, and I'm straight up gonna make an acronym alert that like blows up, but you guys keep saying Okta. Can you talk to me
about
acronym? It's not an acronym.
Yeah.
Well, now
No,
I feel
just
dumb.
a company name. No, that's okay. Cybersecurity companies have weird names.
But this is exactly
OKTA.
it, right? To know exactly what it is. But I'm gonna make sure that becomes a thing. But yeah, thank you for clarifying
that. Is a cool idea
for my non tech brain.
Yeah. No, that's so funny. I hadn't thought about that paradigm. Everything is an acronym, and then it's like, no, this is just a name. It's like Okra.
Can we just have a whole different language just for tech stuff? Oh wait, we do.
We do. Yes. Yeah. Dom, what are your thoughts on this configuration? What kind of if you think about what you've heard on this and the way it's structured, give me some thoughts, at least initially, what that might do from a securability perspective of that identity, if you will.
I mean, you sort of hit the nail on the head. Like, you're reducing trust everywhere, right? In a traditional environment, we'll use Microsoft as the scapegoat here, but Microsoft is a source of truth. It's also your source of trust. In respect, if I authenticate to the same thing that makes a decision on whether or not I can do the thing I asked to do, right? By splitting that out, you're absolutely making your entry point a lot different, right? I'm now having to struggle my way through different layers of environment that I'm probably not going to be able to if I'm a classic sort of script kiddie, in the sense that I now have to unpack.
Oh, you've not heard that term?
Script kiddie.
You haven't heard script kiddie? Hey, all right, Dan, what's your definition of a script kiddie?
I mean, someone that can just run a command line and break into your systems and do that at scale, right? You can just go copy paste it off GitHub.
Exactly.
Right.
And that is Matt Lee's level
creative.
of capabilities. Yeah. That is the Matt Lee capability level. I'm script kiddie plus, I guess you'd put.
Or if we go to no such agency, like, they invent the things that someday script kiddies will copy paste, and you get to different levels of skill. But if I'm that level of attacker, I'm not going to have the operational know-how to dig further in your environment and figure out how to defeat the next layer. Right, so you're adding operational overhead in a way that makes it more. It's similar to the whole you need a ticket number to escalate thing, right? It's an operational overhead. It's also technical overhead, and probably a little demoralizing. Like, if you're not a skilled, committed threat actor, right? When you get into the first thing, you're like, yes, I didn't get anywhere. Damn it! Like, I'm a huge fan of this architecture. I think it's probably not for everyone. It's gonna be an uphill battle for some to implement. But the way you've done it is definitely the way. I hadn't considered doing it that way, but it's also a fantastic way to look at things.
Well, and I sit on a zero trust working group with Cloud Security Alliance, writing a lot of this kind of, if you will, taxonomy of what we're talking about, right? What are the pillars? What are the tenets? What are the things that we, a tenet is something to be true, right? A tenet is something in that nature. And so some of the pillars and tenets of zero trust include no visibility until authentication. In fact, it's completely based on what's called SPA. An SPA for my acronym friend over here.
Before I stop you here, you're
I got you. I'm being aware of it.
I'll start yelling really loud if it doesn't happen.
It's a single packet authorization. Single packet authorization means that I'm going to send one UDP packet that's going to come in with all of the information about me that you need to make a decision. The nonce of my password, potentially, the device hash, the information in fingerprinting, Beyond Identity's response and their SAML response, or whatever it may be that's creating that, all packaged together and reaching that edge now. But before I can even see the things I'm trying to connect to, meaning that the principal tenants in that are saying, I can't even see what's there. And you've kind of created that in a way that your first authentication platform, even if you started at Microsoft, is going to redirect you back through the links, through Beyond Identity, and back through the links of the onboarding process. And so you've almost kind of pre-created a little bit of the stuff we're actually talking about here in that nature. And I'll be honest with you, I was kind of blown away, man. Like, it was a really cool thought. What struggles have you had? What are the things that just suck when you're living in that world?
So for example, we also rolled out all the conditional access in Google Workspace and Azure as well. So you have to make sure that your device that you're coming in from is going to be compliant on all the platforms. If something is out of line, you get blocked. So if I'm using the wrong browser, I can't access my own email. Deployment is a challenge. So you have to know, what are you deploying for, and what are all these different platforms going to look for? So you have to orchestrate all that, and you have to really design around what is Beyond looking for, what is Okta looking for. It's looking for the right network, the right device, the serial number, operating system has to be up to date. Is your device encrypted? Does it have antivirus installed? Is it Intune managed? Is it Adigy or Jamf manage on the Apple side. So those are all things that it's looking for, and it's at every layer. The VPN's looking for it, or the SASE's looking for it. The browser's looking for that. The identity providers are all looking for that too. So I can give you my session cookie today, and I can bet you that you probably won't get in. Or if you get in, you won't get very
game. Okay.
Yeah, let's not play.
That's fair.
Also, Dan, you can't talk about cookies like that. We've already established this.
Yeah, we've already established we're running into a cookie challenge in general.
Hungry,
but that is the things that would stand to mind for me, right? What makes that more possible, and this is why, and this is actually one of my hypotheses, right, is that as we see these type of normalizing of the Legos, like an identity provider is an identity provider is an identity provider, and a service provider is a service provider is a service provider. When you start realizing that relationship that normalizes all of this web traffic and sites we use, create the scenario where you can create that identity on the front end of everything that's consuming it. Choose what layer it needs to live in, whether that's in Okta, whether that's in Microsoft, whether that's in Google, and you could actually start seeing some micro segmentation by that. But that normalization is the reason I say that security will be better as we start to adopt cloud and modern first methodologies that are centered on identity. And the reason for that is exactly this. The challenges mean that you have to have the key. And if you ever look at a key, its intention is to have all these different waves that are different heights. And sometimes you have
hold that a little closer to the camera for a second. I need to
or a little bit closer to me, probably. It's a fixed focal length. Yeah. No, I turned off the autofocus because my son's eyes steal my autofocus. Anyways, I don't want to talk about it. But the point is, my hypothesis being, you could see doing what you're doing is creating it to where the type of attack, the things that are being done have to be so very knowledgeable and have to be so very directed that you're removing the bell curve of risk. And if you can do that as an MSP at scale and learn to use modern things like Intune to make the device provision with the right certs, with the right posture, with the right serial number recorded, with the right information brought back to beyond identity and to the Okta layers. I know you're smiling. I see it in your face. You know what I'm talking about. You can make this an orchestratable thing. That means if you do the right things and you put the key in, it's no harder than turning the key in a lock. Right. And I think this is kind of the concept we're heading towards. Dom, any thoughts on that? I know I just got on my pulpit here. I'm one to do.
No, and I think that's sort of the challenge I was alluding to, right? If you're going to go this route, if you're going to have these types of layers, the other thing you have to consider is, can my users navigate this, right? Or will they find some workaround, or will I hurt a business? Because security is a business driver, but sort of sloppily done security is absolutely going to hold back business. So if to your point, if you orchestrate these things correctly, again, the same conversation we have all the time around Microsoft managed environments, you're just sort of extending that into other vendors. Users don't know that this is happening unless they go, to Best Buy and buy a cheap laptop and try to sign on with, obviously then it stops working. But
has that happened, Dan? I'm going to ask you, has that happened? Have you had somebody come up and I can't bring this device in, it's not working?
Right.
Yeah, somebody's computer died. We have to re-onboard them again and run the Intune on that computer or that virtual machine again before it'll work.
Right.
Yeah. And because Beyond and Okta are looking for so many things, then you have to give it time to provision. So Intune will push it down. Then, the cert's there, the AV's there, Threat Locker, Huntress, all this other stuff in our stack shows up, and then they get access. If those apps are not installed and running, you don't get access. So it does a bit of overhead, but in terms of sleeping well at night, I sleep like a baby knowing nobody's going to hack me.
Well, things break, right? And I think if you're building this sort of environment, you need to explain that to people. Things break, something's going to go wrong. Mm-hmm. When I got into fully managed environments with conditional access, we had spare compliant machines at most customers, right? It was just a calendar item for the office admin to, turn it on and do updates. And that way, if somebody's computer died, they whipped that one up, logged into it, they're good to go. So you can work around that, but implementing that in a way that's smooth is key. Sounds like you've achieved it. Which is really awesome. I think that's a point we should really be driving home to partners, is you can get to a level where you're doing all of this. You're doing all of this SPA and level of inspection where I fully understand what's connecting to my network. And I have a lot more assurance that that is indeed the human with the right device. And when you get it there, users don't know that's happening. It's just happening, right? I don't log in every 24 hours. My computer has an interaction with the TPM every 24 hours, right? That's completely transparent to me as the user.
Yep. And it's nice too, because there's no passwords involved on the attack side. If you look at our Okta logs or Beyond Identity logs and our Microsoft logs, for example,
They're
nobody can,
blank.
password
Yeah.
because there was no password
Right.
at the time. So we used to get attacks on our Microsoft. When you look at the logs, it was, hey, you're getting attacked from Belarus and then from China and from even the US, like someone's trying to breach you. And then once we locked down Microsoft and they started attacking Okta, then we locked that down. And now that, it's Beyond, which is your TPM chip and a agent-based app that's
Yep.
on your computer, there's nothing left for them to do that at that point in terms of identity.
Right.
Yeah.
So attacks
And I like you said that, because one of the things that comes into this is comma space in terms of identity. Is that the device? Is that the human? Are they signed in?
Right.
But then you get into the impermanence of trust, right? In the sense that that is the right sequence of events necessary to connect. Is it still that asset, or is that agent now an agent of the threat actor, right? Is that device that's there already asking for resources as the threat actor by being compromised itself? And that's where it comes into having a very healthy endpoint stack too, right? And that's where it comes
Right.
into having a very healthy either SIM, EDR solution, some type of threat hunting back to your Hunter solution, those type of things. Because what you're trying to do and understand, Rob, if I was trying to teach to someone about cybersecurity, is that trust is not permanent. Trust has this
Right.
ebb and flow. And a lot of people assume that once that's that human, once that's that device, then we're great. There's the other side of that coin. And that's why frameworks are so good and prescriptive, is they help you remember. But I will say, if I was giving out trophies, my trophy would go to Dan Lay for a identity management
So would
solution that
mine.
I don't know that I've
Yes.
seen in any other engagement. Yeah. What about
It's
cost,
something
man?
else.
How's that work
Oh,
out?
the
What's
big
that looking
question.
like for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's a bit more expensive per seat. You do have to pay for all these different two IDPs, and then
Yep.
we're also paying for the Azure licensing and the Google licensing to support context-aware access, because the vendors all gate they gate that behind the
Yep.
higher
Right.
tiers. But as an MSP, I feel like that's an investment that we have to make to protect ourselves. And we're a one-to-many, so if we go down, it's over. And so I would
Yeah.
rather pay the extra $20 roughly
Oh,
per
100%.
person per month.
Yeah.
And
I love you, man.
we're small, but our customers are large, and we're like an IT department, right? That's like we're highly privileged.
Yep.
We have a lot of access, and we have to make sure that it's us doing the work and not somebody else that's in the environment. And that has to
You're
happen
singing in my heart.
continuously.
Yeah, you're singing in my
Well,
heart right now. And I want to take this last 20 minutes to pivot this conversation a little bit. Dom, one of the biggest challenges I think facing MSPs today that Dan touched on already is really supply chain risk, right? And that's what he just described here when he said we have privilege, we have access, we're one to many, and that's the way it works out, right? You'd think we'd learned our lesson in 2014, right? We had the Target breach that was a HVAC supplier that destroyed their world,
yes.
and yet here
Yeah.
we are, Colonial Pipeline, a year and a half later, still now talking about supply chain risk. And through all of those methodologies, SolarWinds 1, 2, 3 for a VPN. You've got Kaseya with their pieces and
Mamaea.
challenges. Microsoft, Mamaea. I forgot. I'm trying to be obfuscatory on this, but the point being is that we've seen this supply chain risk, and it comes back to that same level of trust. So Dom, I'd like to start with you. How did you handle and treat supply chain risk with respect to identity layer? Because that's what we're focusing on right here in your practice.
It's complicated, I would say, right? But I think
True.
if you're going to home an identity, you really need to understand who you're homing it with, right? And let's just start with just the authentication piece and the identification piece, right, of IAAA, because we can go on to authorization later. But if you look at I and A, the first A, right, like you're homing one, you're homing a lot of data.
And what is
IAAA,
Dom?
Oh yeah, all right. Identity,
Thank you.
identity, authentication, authorization, and accounting.
Yes.
And accounting is a fancy term for logging. So
Log that stuff.
IAAL just doesn't sound as cool. So it's IAAA.
Thank you.
If we look at if we look at the I and the A, right, the identity and authentication, at its core, you're storing a lot of data about humans, right? in some sort of list of employees, whatever. There's that, but obviously now that's going to let me into whatever else that identity is going to let me into. So I always look
in the
for
authorization
who am I
phase.
homing this with, right? Okta is a well-known company. Microsoft is a well-known company. Beyond wasn't at the time. They've definitely gotten there. And then start to understand how that vendor operates, right? Dig into, are they SOC 2 and SOC 3 are some of the best ways to look at this, so long as it's scoped properly and they're taking it seriously and they're doing the things they're saying they're doing. There's a lot of advantage you can gain just from understanding how that company operates, and are they developing code safely? Are they doing things in the right way? And then now you have an operational environment, right? And then from there, it's literally everything Dan just described of making sure that you're doing the right things to assure that people are who they say they are, using what they're supposed to use to do the things they're supposed to do.
Well, let's focus on the tactical though, Dom. And what I mean by that is, what about the identity? Do you hand them a credential to your site? Do you give them guest trust? Do you create environments where they don't have to be subject to those same CA policies? How do you treat a guest in a customer environment or in an MSP environment? Because I have some thoughts on that, but I'm just curious, each of you, to answer this question first. The tactical operational aspect. I just slapped my mic because I'm an idiot.
We did not get super mature on that, if I'll be honest. Like it was a challenge I'd yet to solve. Today I would look at just-in-time provisioning, and nowadays being someone who's very Microsoft heavy, and I would live in GDAP extensively. Right nowadays, and I'm not sure.
So require
Google
your
has
partners to be partners. Interesting. That could be a methodology. Yeah.
And if I'm inviting an outside guest, I don't know. What are we talking about? Are we talking about like a contractor? Are we talking about a vendor?
Yeah, let's say contractor, because in my mind, when we were, let's say,
full-blown
that
account
source of attack,
Microsoft uses the V- method, like V- whatever, full-blown account, license, everything. Costs me money to have that human helping me. I don't trust their identity.
What about you, bud? What's your methodology on that for outside people?
For outside people, it's the same thing. We create a named account, or even have like a separate domain that's similar to the domain, but we'll create it there.
That's what I did. So you just stole it. Yeah, so we used a separate vendor domain, and then that vendor domain was being normalized at our MFA layer and taken off as just the username in that context, and then brought back with that other domain. So you could use this separate authentication domain that helped you scope and find early vulnerabilities and attacks because of those domains being able to be monitored delineably from your own domain. So like, definitely love that somebody else came up with that, and I'm not the only idiot buying a separate authentication domain for external vendors. But
super common, especially in enterprise and like defense space. There's vendor domains, there's contractor domains, there's contingent domains. Because for them, I think to start, it was a sheer number of humans that they have to provision identities for. But it does provide that layer of separation that you don't see in a lot of spaces.
Right.
The interesting part is based on. Go ahead, Dan.
Oh, the work that we do is very granular, right? So it should be very granular in the way that we treat that identity. So when you go back to the logs and you have to figure out who did what, there's no question at that point. And as a best practice, we try to do that as much as possible. If we have to use shared accounts, then it does, our identity provider does give us enough logs where we can go back and figure it out, like who used a shared account at what time and things like that.
That's
so
cool.
Do
you make them have the beyond identity as well, extensibility back on their device, or do you bring them somewhere deeper in the layer potentially for that?
Well, everywhere in our layer, for example, requires disk encryption. So that's BitLocker and Intune. That's Beyond's checking for that. Google Chrome, our browser, is checking for that as well. So we use both the Windows account Chrome extension, for example, and we also use the endpoint verification from Google. So we also do Chrome Enterprise, and then now we're rolling out another tool called Talon Cybersecurity, which also checks for the same things too. So
what's cool about that is your layers are also detecting failures in other layers to detect those challenges, right? Like, I think that's really neat. The first time that made value for me, just to help anyone in the audience understand why that's so great, is that we were using a well-known PSA tool in the industry, and I won't say which one it was because I'm not that guy, but this well-known tool kept triggering my Duo device health policy. but was not triggering my Microsoft authentication policies and challenges. And it was very strange to me. And this was several years ago. And what I ended up learning was my Google browser wouldn't have detected it because the browser plugin is not running in the self-contained browser the vendor brought with them in their code. And that browser was running on Chrome 57. So every time the authentication kept trying to come through, Duo said, no, you're not passing. It ain't happening.
Right.
And it was because it wasn't passing. And I had to open up a big hole in the front end of my identity layer because I had to allow that to function because of the business case that they provided. And so it's really challenging there. Have you had to make any similar architectural compromises to support structure in your mind? Anything come to mind? Don't name names. We don't dox vendors here. But
here and there, but where they allow allow listing, for example, then we'll turn that on as well. If we have to make an exception somewhere else, and then our IPs are all behind our Cato networks, which is SASE. So then even that has a bunch of device posturing it's checking for as well, and that's also tied back to our identity. So every layer, you can compromise the SASE, you can compromise the endpoint, the user, and it with everything turned on across the board, it should be a lot more secure.
You're reducing risk.
Yeah, exactly.
You're reducing
and
risk.
Also, what's nice, like you said, is visibility, right? If you have the controls in all these different environments, the SASEs, SaaS apps, and things like that, then you'll find, you'll get blocked, and then you'll realize, okay, let me go ask this vendor to go update their thing or whatever it is, or ask this end user to update their computer or their phone, stuff like that. So, it's better to
Dom,
have it
I don't know
off.
about I agree, and I love the interesting part about this, Dom. This is what I would postulate: is this is complex. This has a lot of moving parts. This has a lot of room for failure. This has a lot of reasons that if you're looking at this solution, you would say, "There's no way I'm doing that." But what I would postulate is, Dom, what do you think the scalability of this is once you have that figured out?
It's like anything else in the MSP space. Like build SOP around it, build out your architecture of how you do it. I always tell partners, do it the same way every time. Like every time you implement something should be the exact same, and then you add things or modify things for that customer to meet, whatever weird business case you have, and then you document those exceptions. But if your baseline is 80% of your configuration every single time, that's very scalable. It's easy for everyone to support. It's easy for you to hire and train on. It's easy for you to understand. It's easier for you to diagnose. So I think any solution, doesn't matter how complex you get, right? SpaceX builds their rocket engines the same every time, right? That's a very complex piece of machinery. So standardize. It would be whatever you're going to standardize on, standardize, and it will be scalable.
That's what I was hoping you'd say. I think, Dan, and maybe you tell me if I'm wrong, you've really got a very scalable solution as long as the pieces and the Legos that are plugging in on the other side are a service provider and an identity provider.
Right.
And that's what kind of my point about the normalization of those bolts. If they're all Legos and it's not Legos and Duplos, I don't have awkward meetings of joints where they're not supposed to fit together, right? And so I would surmise this is really scalable. So how has that been for you over the last X number of years since you kind of designed and made this spot? Does it scale? Are you finding you're able to continue growing that without massively having to scale internal resources and technical resources?
I think it's scalable. Basically, each vendor has we're able to use like Terraform or different platforms like that to pull out the configuration and then take that configuration we built once and clone it into multiple clouds from there. So it even though it's very complex, like Dom said, it's a repeatable template, and that's what we're working on now, is building a templatized like blueprint, just basically making a blueprint for each system, each IDP, each SP, and then deploying it at scale as code.
Yeah.
So that's the next step, is configuration as code, and how do we configure all this into code?
That triggers me a little bit, right? Because when I first went through the process when I was at my former MSP of bringing an IDP SP relationship to everything, right? Everything needed to be single sign-on, everything, if I could do it. When I first went down that path, they weren't even using the same language between them. They didn't even call them the same things. They didn't call them the same endpoint. They didn't call them. And so I think a lot of the challenge you had, and as I had, Dan, is really just doing it the first time. You don't know what's going to happen to those user objects when you convert them. You don't know what's going to. And so it's that plan as code. It's taking, once you've figured out that they call this an IDP endpoint and they call this the authoritative certificate zone, and they right, like you get into these nomenclatural challenges.
Is that a real
on
example? Did you run into the
It is a real
authoritative
example.
certificate zone?
Yeah.
Okay.
It is a real
Cool.
example.
Yeah, we have to eat our own dog food and experience it every single day. And then for us, we learn the hard way so that our customers don't have to. And then we can still achieve scale into the end users. It's super easy, right? They click a button, they get into all their stuff. They don't know any different. But in the back end, it's all this crazy stuff going on in the background, right?
And the migration is one of the more challenging pieces for me, in the point that you have to, like, let's say you're working in monday.com. And as you use monday.com, you have this user that's been created at monday.com. When you're doing an IDP connection to make up and take away that username password and switch to an SSO model, every vendor handles it a little differently of how they convert the objects. Sometimes you have to destroy all those objects and make new ones. Sometimes you have to change their email address. Sometimes, and there's things that become these operational pain in the butts. And I think that piece, Dan, is something you've now built kind of a file cabinet for, of when you plan a project, you know what's going to happen to the user experience better now as you've done these conversions.
Yeah, absolutely. So every app we have like a Notion page or internal guide that says, here's how you deploy X app or something like that. So, and then here are some of the groups, let's say for Atlassian or Jira, here are some of the groups that Jira supports and Confluence needs. And then you put that into your Okta, and then Okta has like a Terraform connector. So then you can take those and then you can deploy for your all your customers that use Jira, for example, then they all get the same groups for all those apps.
And the good news is with Atlassian, you can just type in a hard-coded password that's widely available on the internet today. Sorry, bad poke. I don't know if y'all saw the news. But, Atlassian had a vulnerability where they've had two years worth of embedded password now that's been there. It's nuts.
Wow.
Anyway, sorry, took us off tangent here. Dom, any thoughts? Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. We're gonna have a Canadian standoff.
Any complex app like Salesforce as well. There's so many complex permissions and things like that in that app. And if you are an IT person, you have to read 5 pages of documentation. Here's how you do all this stuff. And if we use an IDP, then we can just copy paste. So that's the nice thing, is as an MSP that focuses on identity, is we figured out once for one client, and then now we can support 10, 100 customers with Salesforce, and then take all that logic and just use it over and over again because it's already built and working here in one customer. Then you just clone it over to other ones. So that's also what's nice about using an agnostic IDP.
The other cool part is you can obfuscate the final groups a bit, right? Like ultimately, if your middle layer is the one where you want the normalized groups, so you can use the same template and the same script every time, that doesn't have to one-to-one correlate to downline groups sometimes, right? And so you can do a little bit of group manipulation potentially because of that middleware IDP that you're bringing to the solution. So that's a really brilliant way to scale that, I think. I wouldn't have thought of that mass aspect of it. So that's pretty cool. No, it's so neat. All right, let's go through some closing thoughts. We're getting really close to time, and I think we've at least bored people to death enough with the technical aspects. But I'd love to go through and do a little bit of closing thoughts. And Dom, if you want to kick us off, or Dan, I don't care, and I'll wrap us up here, and we'll get out, and we'll let Dom close us out.
My biggest thing is that all of this really drives home the point that the walled garden is gone. You're not putting people behind firewalls, right? And your customers that are putting people behind firewalls are going to lose talent about it. We just spent 2 days earlier this week talking about that. So it's massively important for you to embrace things like this and understand that identity is now very much so your front door in a way that it never used to be. So all of these technical tidbits really contribute to the fact that in a modern strategy, you need to start with identity and work outward from there. Identity, it's not the new firewall, but identity is literally how we do what we do anywhere, anytime, on any device, right? That's the whole pitch. So start with identity, work outward, and Dan has done just that. He's really worked and dove way into identity to make that probably one of the hardest components of his security stack, and I'm pretty impressed by it.
Dan, you got the world in front of you. To quote Hot Ones, look at the camera here, 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 and here, and tell the world what you got on your mind.
Yeah,
Preferably the one in front of you. It works better that way.
Yeah, you basically got it right. So it all starts with identity. If you're a network admin and you get in, your account gets compromised, that's a pretty bad thing. So how do we make sure that that highly privileged person is who they are, and then you can secure your entire supply chain. And it all does really start with identity. And then how do you layer around device posture, stack, and different variables around that? And I think you just have to learn. And I think it's super important for all MSPs to really focus on identity as the first step.
Yeah. And that's a great segue, Dan. Thank you. Because for me, when you talk about the identity layer being, paramount, there's a have and have nots coming. There's a world where you have a central IDP that is authoritative. It's not reliant upon curb roasting attacks on an AD controller or it's not. It now comes to this identity as this thing that lives, and it lives now in multiple identity providers, and it's some summation of each of those identity providers, each with their own checks, each with their own statements of distrust, right? And so you kind of get into this world where Dom hit the nail on the head, right? Phyllis Lee says, and Phyllis Lee's the senior director of controls at CIS. Phyllis Lee says, your client's network ends where your user's fingertips land. And the concept of that is saying that the identity is the consuming entity, period. It doesn't matter where they are. There is this believed and I think wrong belief that the walled garden ever protected us. No, it was probably always identity at that point. In fact, most of the red team, blue team exercises you see are all exercises in attacking the infrastructural layers of the world to then supplant identity in that way.
Right.
And we're kind of living in a new architecture. And I think embracing that and driving forward is a paradigmical shift. It's actually a different way of seeing the world. And I think that it's needed, it's critical, and it is part of what is delivering cybersecurity. So like if I had an Oscar or an Emmy to give you right now on the identity side of protecting our world, Dan, I would have it on the shelf for you, my friend. So thank you so much for being here. I'm in love with what you've built, and I will probably check back in with you. And I'd love to hear if you ever have a massive failure, not so I can laugh at you, I might, but essentially to build up the understanding of what is it that people need to learn from somebody that's a thought leader in this space. And I think you're ahead of the edge in a lot of that right now. So humble to have had you on our show. Dom, if you want to go ahead and get us over to a wrap up and let these fine folks go home so we can move about my vacation business.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks so much for joining us, Dan. This was a great conversation. That's the game for this week. Both Matt and myself are going on a little vacation next week, so we won't see you, but we'll see you in a couple weeks. As Rob said, do all the things, click all the buttons down there for the liking and the subscribing and interacting, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.